Today's podcast is officially sponsored by Microdoses. Yes, your ears do not deceive you officially. Amanita muscaria. That is a mushroom, ladies and gentlemen, and this particular blend helps you sleep, helps you rest. Sleep like a log. I think I tallied 9, maybe 10 hours of straight sleep. Usually I get up. Usually I go up to go pee. Not this time. I didn't check my bed. I might have wet myself, but it doesn't matter. I got 9 hours of deep sleep, vivid dreams as well. So if you guys are interested in this stuff, you have to be 18 or older to use this, by the way. If you're interested in this type of thing, go to mycrewdoses.com and at checkout, use promo code The Chamber. Get you a little 10% off. Welcome to the Curiosity Chamber. All right, 3, 2, 1, boom, and we're live. Peter Young, appreciate you coming here, man, spending some time with me. I really appreciate that, man.
Jay, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Of course. Yeah, so let's talk about this, man. You lived in a tiny religious cult for 20 years, but was finally rescued. And then your story kind of exposes how secrecy protects cults and then how to recover from that.
Yep. So I unwittingly married into a cult when I married the love of my life. This would be 26 years ago. And I knew even before I met Paige about the weird family guru, quote unquote, that this guy told me about, the Clausen family. That was her maiden name. And I fell in love with this woman immediately. Like within 2 weeks, I was 90% sure I wanted to marry her. But I had to meet her father, because she talked about him all the time, and this mysterious Uncle Robert. And he wasn't related at all. He was born and raised in Syria. My former wife and I were both, Northern European, typical, tall, she's blonde hair, blue eyed, those kind of looks. And I did meet him before we got married, and I really missed the mark. I kind of thought, he's odd, charismatic, but not a danger. And then I found out, I was wrong. Over 20 years, he just slowly but surely, took over every aspect of our lives. And it wasn't until I really, I basically got kicked out of the cult when she left me. She left me, started telling the kids that I'm the devil, and that the Lord opened my eyes and ears to the truth. Because I always tell people, Jay, you never know you are in a cult, you only know you were in one. Because cults are about mind control, right?
Yeah. It's a lot of people don't know they're within the cult, before it's like too late, And so what kind of people do they look for to be inside of a cult? Like what makes it attractive for the cult leaders to go out and basically recruit, I guess?
Yeah, good question. First of all, cults come in all different shapes and sizes, right? So some are big, some are tiny. Ours was tiny. There's a guy named Stephen Hassan, Dr. Hassan, who's kind of one of the cult experts in America. He wrote a book, Combating Cult Mind Control. And he said, the biggest change in the last few decades is the rise of these tiny little cults like ours. Ours was like less than 12 people, probably. I mean, maybe 6 or 7 adults and some kids.
Do you know how many people were in the Waco cult? That was a smaller cult, wasn't it?
Yeah, so that would be David Koresh and the Branch Davidians, and yeah. Under 100 people, but I want to say there was probably a good 50 people that died. So it was probably between 50 and 100.
Okay.
Yeah. Whereas Jim Jones in Jamestown, drinking the Kool-Aid, that was close to around 900, I think. Maybe a little less. Don't quote me, but there was a lot of people there. And then there's the Moonies, Scientology. Now you're talking thousands worldwide, right? But ours,
they got memberships. They got like the platinum membership, and
we didn't have that. Yeah, we didn't. Ours didn't come with a credit card. No, no. And I also tell people too. Listen, it could happen to anybody, because nobody thinks they're joining a cult, right? Like nobody says, "I'm going to join a cult." They think they're joining something else,
right?
Following the real church that knows the true gospel, or an enlightened business development group, et cetera, et cetera. It's only when you get out and the mind control doesn't have any control over you that you can look back and say, oh, yep, I was in a cult.
When you're looking back at these things, like, are there telltale signs that are pretty much like you couldn't question anything, and then when you look back at it retrospect, oh, I was in a cult. Like,
yes. Yeah. So again, even though they do come in all different shapes and sizes, there are some clear similarities, let's say. And our little cult and Uncle Robert, we checked all the boxes. So cult leaders are narcissistic,
Yeah.
charismatic, have a grandiose sense of self. The cult leader makes all the rules, but they don't apply to him.
Mm.
And yeah, you're not allowed to question the cult leader. And Robert Booty checked all the boxes.
Yeah. So, did you ever find yourself questioning him,
Mm.
or were you just so far immersed that you just followed?
I was probably only truly brainwashed for about, let's say, 2.5 to 3 years tops. Whereas prior to that, for the first 5, 10, 15 years of our marriage, I went along to get along. And so I was
Mm.
always asking questions. And so therefore, I was always kind of on the hot seat. And my wife would, continually be probably disappointed in me or embarrassed of me because I didn't just believe and listen. Why don't you just trust him? He knows more than you. And I would always ask questions. For instance, he thought that all of recorded history was really a struggle between the descendants of Jacob, greater Christendom, and Esau, who becomes Edom, who becomes modern Jewry. So he was a raving anti Semite. So all of recorded history was the Jews trying to take over the world. And I would be like, what do you mean? Like, where's the evidence for this? Like, I'm willing to listen, but this doesn't sound right to me.
Interesting. Yeah.
And because I would ask questions, I was the bad guy.
And is that what ultimately did you in? That like that's why they wanted you out because you know were taking your own opinion and you were trying to question some things that probably no one has ever questioned. It's interesting. Once you start questioning things, there's always this defense mechanism that happens. Then the cult leader usually doesn't appreciate that, and they'll try to ostracize you.
Yeah, exactly. So so I would ask a question, right, Jay? And then the answer was not so much, well, let me explain it, Peter. It was, why are you so dumb that you can't understand me? Kind of
So
like,
there's that authoritative figure going on
oh,
there.
yeah. Like, again,
Yeah.
if you can't question the leader, but somebody does, well, there's got to be an answer. And the answer was always, you don't get it. It's never, oh, yeah, this idea might be a bad one. No, it's you don't get it. And so, in the eyes of my former wife, yeah, I was just never mature. I never got it. I was never truly sold out for the true faith, which was not, I believe, the Christian faith of the Bible, but more of the doctrine of Robert Booty.
What were some of the wildest practices that you could remember within this cult, if there were any?
So there were some weird ones for sure. Like
Yeah.
there was no sexual abuse, there was no physical abuse. My wife and I was completely faithful to her our entire marriage. Did not want the divorce at all, and really over the last few years tried to even get along with Uncle Robert. But let's say he taught all the men we had to sit down to pee. We couldn't stand up to pee because that was too
Whoa.
messy.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
um, Casinos are the true churches in America. So the churches that people go to on Sundays are a waste of time. Casinos are the true churches.
You're
He
saying
also,
casino?
yeah, casinos, yeah, yeah. So the idea was that anybody could go to a casino, and regardless of your success or your bank account or whatever it is in life, you could be quote unquote blessed by the Lord. Which, okay, but I see people worshiping money in a casino, not the Lord. And oh, by the way, Uncle Robert was always broke. Go figure.
Of
Um,
course.
let's see. Oh, he also called them his office. So if they ever went to the casino, because we lived in Idaho, Montana, and so there's a casino in an Indian tribe in northern Idaho. They would go there all the time, and that was the office.
Yeah.
What
Interesting.
else? Well, there was a bunch of other stuff like that. It was just
Nothing ever like he didn't try to sleep with everyone's wife because that usually happens within cults. Like that's that seems pretty standard within cults.
there's a lot of, yeah, let's say sexual inappropriateness in cults. Thankfully, in ours, there was not. Would he do things and say things that were, again, like if you were to come over to dinner to my house and said some of these things, I would have been like, thanks, Jay, but you need to leave. Like that was inappropriate. Well, that never happened with Uncle Robert. He could do or say anything. Now, thankfully, he didn't do anything bad, but he would say some stuff that was, again, let's say inappropriate for kids. So here's a wild story. So in 2016, the big story in the country was Trump versus Clinton, right? And he was a huge Trump fan, mostly because he despised Clinton. And so we would have these little conferences in northern Idaho at my former in-laws, which is basically him talking for hours, and we would just sit there and listen to him. So he starts describing the hyena pack in Africa, and then how the dominant member of the pack is the female who's given birth a couple times. And the female hyena, after it's given birth, develops this pseudopenis. It's kind of this fleshy thing that looks like a penis, and it's bigger than the poor male hyenas.
Oh,
So the
that's
male
interesting.
hyenas like lick the groin of the female as a display of submission. And he then
Jeepers.
applied that to Clinton, to Hillary Clinton, that, she is this female hyena ready to dominate the world stage. And it's like, you kind of look back at it laughing now, but it's disgusting. And my kids were listening to this.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. That's strange.
Yeah, but thankfully there was nothing. There was other stuff you'd say, creepy, yeah, but illegal, no. Weird, creepy, odd, yeah, but illegal, no. Thankfully.
Did Uncle Robert, were you able to know if he was creating this cult based on any other cults that were around? Like, was there a blueprint that he was going off of, or like, do you know how he started this, or why, what his intentions were?
Yeah, boy, great question. No one's ever asked me that. So to your first question, I don't think so. I don't think there was any other kind of blueprint or because there was no name to our cult or church. So it was just him. It started when he met my former in-laws at a tiny seminary in Southern I think it's Fresno, California. Before my ex-wife Paige was even born. So like late 60s,
Wow.
early 70s.
Yeah.
And then Robert just kind of glommed on to my former in-laws because they were a young married couple at the time, and kind of started at that moment this kind of parasitic dominant relationship where he was just always knew better. He always knew better than everybody. And so then people would say, well, what's in it? What was in it for Robert? Because like we would all tithe to him, which, is a practice in the Christian faith where you give 10% of what you've made as a way of saying, thank you, Lord.
Yep.
And we would all tithe to him. Now, none of us were wealthy, so he wasn't getting wealthy. I just think it was the being able to control people and being able to be revered and adored and idolized, which is what we did to him. And he must have just loved that, I guess.
I'm just trying to wonder where it stems from. Like, something had to have happened in his childhood to where he wanted to grasp that power and wanted control over people.
Like that's kind of like, now we're really digging deep into the weeds. Like, how does the narcissistic, because they all are, right? All cult leaders are narcissists.
They all are, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So like, yeah, what happened when they were growing up formative that made them be this person, David Kress, Jim Jones, etc., in their 20s, 30s, and later in life? I have no idea. Robert grew up in Syria. And by all accounts, now again, he would always tell these stories of his parents were these wonderful people. Maybe they were, I don't know. But he grew up in Syria. So that's an area that would have been dominated by, anti-Jewish thought and, obviously pro-Muslim. So he would probably always been in the minority because he grew up in a Christian home. So I don't know.
Well, do you think that he actually believed in what he was preaching, or do you think this was all just made up?
I think he did believe it. I would say he believed his core philosophy, which would have been mostly Christian, but in Christian thought or in the Bible, what it says, and not just thought, but that's there in black and white, is that there's only one way to heaven, that's through Jesus. So you don't need an intermediary. You don't need somebody else. You don't need a priest. You don't need someone else to get to God, right? You got Jesus. Okay. So you don't pray to somebody else. You don't need to confess to somebody else. Now, yeah, if I did something to you, Jay, hey, I stole. I'm sorry. I confessed to you, right? Please forgive me. Okay, that's different. But so Robert would have taken basic, fundamental, and sound Christian doctrine, but then twisted it and given his own perverse twist to it. And boy, it sure seemed like he believed it.
Did he have his own books? Did he have like a bunch of scriptures? Stuff along those lines?
No, so he hadn't written anything, although he always talked about he was going to take the Bible in Arabic, sorry, the Arabic. Yeah, I was going to say what would a
Right,
Muslim
right.
read?
Yeah.
Arabic, yeah.
Arabic.
So he feels like the Arabic translation of the Bible is the purest, the most sound, and he speaks Arabic. So he was going to translate it into English. And we kept waiting for this, to happen one day. And who knows if he's ever done it. That was that was the closest he ever came to writing a book because, of course, it was going to take him so long because he was going to provide his notes and interpretation of every verse. Which, oh my gosh. But he would read a lot, and he would have us read the books that he read, which was fine because, again, Jay, the one thing to point out is cult leaders don't just lure you in by spouting utter nonsense, right? Like, I don't think I'm that dumb. They sound really good at first. They
Oh
share
yeah.
the truth, and then over time they slowly twist it.
You share the truth, and then there's this sense of community, and it's people that you link with and match with, and there are a lot of positives I see in a cult, but then there's always this weird turn it takes, and it usually has to do with power, control, sex, and you have to give money to them, and it's just
Well,
it
and,
always
and
takes a
I'll,
weird bend.
And I think you make a great point, but I'll change the wording a little bit. There's a lot of good in things that start out not as a cult, but then morph or metastasize into a cult. Like I remember I used to think, there's nothing wrong with having a mentor. Like Uncle Robert was a mentor. I used to think that early on. He was my wife's mentor. He was my in-laws' mentor. Okay, you and I would both agree having a mentor is a great idea. But then it became more, and then it became, worse. He became the cult leader.
So, like, let's try to establish this real quick. What is a cult exactly? Like, what's the definition of a cult? And if you don't know, I can look it up. But because, like, when I hear cult, like, would being in a karate dojo, is that a cult?
Okay, another great question. Oh, sorry, you got some good questions. So I think you'd get a lot of different definitions for cults. I would lean heavily on Dr. Hassan. He's written 3 books. I'm actually reading another one of those books called The Cult of Trump, which I disagree. Like I love Dr. Hassan and his writing, but I completely disagree calling Trump and his followers a cult because somebody else wrote a really good book. Some lady that grew up in a cult. It's called Uncultured. Very good book. Look it up. And she grew up in a really bad cult, definitely a cult. There was sexual abuse, etc. She got out as like a teenager, came to America, and then joined the army. And so then sure, here she is, Jay, like first week of boot camp, like at Paris Island or something, and all these instructors are screaming at her, and she's
Mhm.
like, "Did I just join another cult?" And
Right, right.
through the book, she makes the point that no, it just because you might have a really strong dysfunctional culture that's different than a cult, right? So like your karate dojo that you brought up, you could have a very intense and dysfunctional culture, but that's different than a real true cult. And I thought that was an important distinction to make.
So, what do you think the difference between like what exactly pushes a cult over the edge to make it a cult from this dysfunctional group?
Undue mind control, coercive, manipulative uh, mind control from a leader who does not have your best interest in mind.
Would you think that See, this is interesting now. Wouldn't you think that the military can be considered a cult since they're trying to recruit 17 years old people that can't really think for themselves? I mean, their frontal cortex is not even developed yet, and there's a bunch of incentives that seem like they are lies because when people come back from the military, they're usually disheveled, and a lot of them go homeless, and they were promised something, and then within boot camp, I mean, their whole mind is changing, to someone who thinks they know better, and that's the chain of command. And at the very top of that chain of command, they don't personally, I don't think they give a shit about these little grunts within the military. It's just you need more bodies to try and overtake these
Who are the
geographical places,
Yeah, who are the enemies, right?
where the
Um,
enemy is.
and I think that, so the lady's name is Daniela Young, Daniela Mestianik, I think you say it, Young. She did a very good job in her book because she was in the military. She was in the army for maybe 8 to 10 years, and I would say that number one, the people who are, let's say, training the maybe not cadets, but the soldiers there at Paris Island or at boot camp, are fulfilling a job. They're being trained, they're being paid, and their goal is to improve this soldier so that they are a better fighting force. People may disagree with that, that's a good thing or not, but the goal of those people is to improve this person so that he or she is a better soldier. And I also think too, because you do have this chain of command, which I've never been in the military, so I don't really understand it, but there is a chain of command. I know that, that you have accountability, right? You have accountability through the ranks. Cult leaders are not accountable. So, nobody in the military is unaccountable. Like, I mean, even the 5-star general, whoever it is, like even a guy like Eisenhower, or what's the better example? The Korean War, was it not Patton, the guy that waded ashore to the Philippines, who the President Truman fired? So in other words, like, and I'm totally drawing a blank on his name, but all military officers are eventually accountable to somebody else, and cult leaders are never accountable.
Interesting. That's a good point. Yeah, I was just playing the devil's advocate. My dad was in the military, so I have nothing but respect for these people. I just wanted to try, it's interesting conversation.
Yeah. How come I can't think of the guy's name? You would know then. He was, during World War II, he got kicked out of the Philippines because their force wasn't strong enough, and then he came back and waded ashore. Not Patton, not Eisenhower, but MacArthur.
It's MacArthur. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice. You got it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's it. Yeah. This was just like live in my mind as we're talking about cults. I'm trying to like just decipher what's a cult, what's not a cult. And the accountability thing is huge. Yeah. They really don't take accountability. Like they are the last stand. Like they're the only person that they answer to.
Well, okay. So another characteristic, and again, these are not across the board, pretty darn close of every cult leader. And one of them would be gatekeeper to God. So there's grandiose sense of self and gatekeeper to God. Okay. So like with Robert Booty, again, like in our little cult, no one was really saved until you got saved by him or he approved, which is kind of like one and the same. So like, here there's God, and then there's like Robert Booty, and then the rest of us, right? So like he would not have like probably consciously thought and said to us, I'm God. Maybe David Koresh and Jim Jones said that, but he never did. But boy, he was pretty close. And if you think that way, who would you answer to, right?
Right. Yeah. Do you see anyone right now that seems like they're trying to play God, or you can see them trying to start their cult of some sort?
I don't. Another point that whenever I share, when I go on podcasts or in my book that I wrote, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger, or if I go speak publicly, one of the points I like to make is, well, there's two of them. Number one, this could happen to anybody, right? Like I never planned on joining a cult, and I never would have followed this guy if it hadn't been for my wife. I went along to get along.
Yeah.
But number two is that they can hide, at least small cults, they can hide in society really easily. So like Jay, when she left me, my wife left me, and I was totally beaten down, emasculated. I couldn't sleep. I was a wreck. This is 6 years ago. And I finally, told my family and other friends, and they rallied around me and supported me, and the Lord strengthened me. And I finally told people at my office, like 9 months after she left. And I thought for sure they would know, like I would show up to work with puffy red eyes. I'd go for long walks. And I told them what was happening with my family and my marriage, and nobody knew. Nobody had any idea.
Wow.
So the point is, if the guy that cut you off on the highway or the rude grocery clerk, right, at the store, you never know what they're going through. So, be kind. But also just realize that, this Robert Booty, Uncle Robert, his neighbors probably have no idea what's going on.
That's the wildest thing. I always think about that stuff. I'm like, how many murderers have I passed on the street? I just don't know.
I know. Yep. Or, like for me, I'm single now. Has there been a time where I like almost, bumped into or walked or passed somebody on the street that I will marry one day, right? Like I always think about that kind of stuff. Like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Fascinate me.
Like you have childhood pictures of you, and then in the background, someone that you're going to marry. I've seen a bunch of those. It's kind of cute.
Well, I tell you, in my book, and I'm not trying to push my book too much, but I would hope people.
Oh, we're going to push it here.
Okay. Again, it's called Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. And so you're thinking, well, why did you pick that title? Okay. It's a bizarre and fascinating story that I won't get into too much because I want people to read it. But Paige, my former wife, had this fascinating dream before we met, like right before we met 27 years ago. And Uncle Robert was able to take that dream, wrote this huge, like 23-page letter, crazy letter, and turn it on its head, completely change the meaning of it. And to this day, lives are still being affected by that.
Whoa.
And so I read the letter once back in 1996, and I found it again many years later. So again, like, you looking at some old photograph, I found this old document and my jaw hit the floor because I finally saw what it really meant. And it's fascinating. It's tragic, but fascinating.
Jeez. Wow. What a realization.
Yeah.
Good Lord. What kind of so back to this cult, what was the religion that was preached? Like what exactly was it going on in there?
Well, we were Christian, so,
Okay.
non-denominational. So, we weren't, Baptist or Methodist or this or that. We were just Christian. We would probably consider ourselves more Christian than anybody else. But, there were certain parts of Christianity that I thought, I think Uncle Robert or Robert Booty was correct. I appreciate what he shared. But then he took some of the more really core foundational beliefs of Christianity. The biggest one being, you don't need to do anything to be saved. It's a gift. You can't earn it. Like in Christian thought, the idea is that we are sons of God, right? Okay, so let's say, Jay, if your parents were rich and they bequeathed to you a ton of money, right? Like Donald Trump's parents or other rich people's parents.
Right.
Did you do anything to earn that? No, you couldn't pick your parents. That's the basic foundational principle of Christianity, that we get picked. We can't earn it. And Robert Booty's theology really kind of changed that. And that's wicked.
Did you grow up Christian or?
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah, and I remember one of my sister-in-laws thought, I should have really expounded upon that in my book, that I grew up, again, we're not perfect, but we grew up in a Christian home. My parents are still together, still alive.
Yeah.
I was the youngest of 5 boys. We went to church every Sunday, which again doesn't mean we were perfect, just means we were trying to get taught, right? The Word of God. Went to Christian camps as a kid during the summer, and never knew anybody in a cult. Had never ever thought in my wildest dreams that I would be part of a cult, because I was old enough. I'm probably a lot older than you. I remember Jonestown. I would have been like 8 or 9, maybe. I remember.
That's fascinating, man. That's an interesting thing you just brought up, that you've seen cults and you're like, those people are nuts.
Yeah. I mean, okay, if you're I'm 55. If you're over 50, it wasn't like 9/11. Like, do you remember where you were that moment? There's not that big a deal, but you remember it. I mean, it was
sure
crazy when that happened.
Yeah. I mean, the remnants are still echoing. Right? Like there's so many documentaries still coming out this day about Jonestown. It's so crazy.
Yeah. And then, from there, it would have been, I'm trying to think what the next big one would have been, Waco or Heaven's Gate. I think the Heaven's Gate folks.
Is that the one where they wore like the Nike shoes?
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I think those were the 90s. And I'm sure there have been many others. Okay. The Moonies have been around a long time.
There's a lot of yoga instructors.
Yeah.
And their cults, yeah.
And I listen, I do think there's a chance that the word cult can get overused a little bit. Like, again, Dr. Hassan, who I really admire, I do not think Trump and MAGA is a cult. You could disagree with Trump all you want, but I would not call that a cult. I do think the word can get a little overused.
What do you think the Trump thing is?
It's a good question. I'm only a little bit ways into the book, and listen, like, I would be MAGA. I would consider myself MAGA only because of all the people that absolutely hate and despise him. I mean, listen, if I were to work for Donald Trump for a day, I don't know if I would last a day. I'm sure in person he's not the nicest guy to be around.
Yeah, he might fire you.
Yeah, he might fire me. I might quit.
The Apprentice.
Trust me, I am not like, I don't worship the ground this guy walks on, nor do I think a lot of people do. I think it's more along the lines of, there's so much hatred and frustration with, let's say, permanent DC, that we look at a guy like Trump and think, well, he's fighting them and he's a fighter, so we'll back him. For me, that's it, right? Like, I don't go much further than that.
too much like you're either on this team or that team. That's what I don't like about what's going on. I mean, it's like everyone has to think for themselves. You can like parts of the left side, you can like parts of the right side, but ultimately what people need to do is make a decision for themselves. Just don't like it because your team says so. And that's where we're getting into this weird area. You know, everyone's on teams.
And I again, I'm only about 50 pages into Dr. Hassan's book, and much of what he is saying, I would say, well, it's accurate, but you could, like you just said, you could say it about the other team. You could say it about Obama's fans. You could say it about any politician, really. I mean,
You could, yeah.
politicians do kind of oftentimes use the same playbook of division, right? I mean, they divide. Yeah.
The cult word might be getting thrown around with Trump because of how extreme things take it, and it I don't know if this is just a narrative because we know who owns the media, which is generally the left side, so they'll push everything and anything to give this looking like it is a cult, to looking like the MAGA people are a cult, and that people just hang on his every word and just listen for what he's like tweets out or says, and they'll run right to it. And then of course the I think it was January 6th, like that whole thing doesn't help either. But there's just a lot of conspiracy. There's a lot of left versus right and pushing out these narratives to make one group look horrible. And, you know, I just try not to get immersed in that stuff just because how can you even know nowadays what really is true? There's a problem with so much information out there, and a lot of it's bullshit, but some of it's true. We have to do a lot of sifting through information to figure out what's true. I think that's an issue that we're trying to learn real time.
You know, I would agree with you. Information is usually a good thing. The more information, the better. But we do get inundated with so much information. I don't remember where I heard this, but I heard it many years ago that the average American in, I think it was the 1700s, in their lifetime would either read or have access to as much written material as one edition of the Sunday New York Times.
Whoa.
I thought that was amazing, right?
Yeah.
We have so much information bombarding us on a daily basis. It's incredible. I mean, you can't keep up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm just worried that I'm gonna like my brain's gonna automatically just push out stuff that's that's important to me just because I'm overwhelmed. I mean, when you have a cell phone on your side 24 hours a day and you're just reading information nonstop and listening to podcasts nonstop like I do, it becomes worrisome. Like, I don't know what information I need to keep and what information I need to let go. It is overwhelming.
Right. And I'll say this, Jay, and I realize this is not a religious broadcast, but for me as a Christian, there's a verse in James, the book of the Bible, it's James chapter 1. And I'm paraphrasing, but he says, if anybody lacks wisdom, ask God and he'll give it to you, but you have to believe, you can't doubt, right? So I ended up doubting everything. That's what cult leaders do, is they make you doubt and question and fear everything. And then they swoop in and give you the cure, right? Like it's, again, the doctor gives you the poison, then they give you the cure so that you elevate this person. So I no longer look to my former wife or Uncle Robert or anybody else for wisdom. I pray and I know the Lord gives it to me because I believe. So the roundabout way of saying we all need to have discernment. I get discernment through my faith, meaning I know where I need to go for good information and I know what I should stay away from. And that, I think, is the key.
That's good. I have a question here that just came into my mind. But I don't mean any offense by this. This is just, I ask questions that come right to my mind. Okay, so if God were to come down and you were able to meet him, why wouldn't that be a cult? Like that's the man or woman of it's the leader, right? It's the end all be all. And you're basically hanging on every word, listening to them. Why do they know best? Wouldn't that be a cult?
Well, this would be a very long answer, Jay, but I'll try and give it a short answer. I'm not offended at all, by the way.
Okay, thanks.
To me, yeah, no worries. To me, again, like truth should be able to defend itself, right? So, like, as a believer, I should not be offended by any hard questions because if I then have a hard time answering, there's a problem, right? So I'm not
Yeah.
offended at all. But to me, to answer it, you have to go back to everybody's worldview. And I believe there's only two worldviews. And the worldview number one would be that there is a God. He created everything. He is sovereign and knows everything, right? And so therefore, man's ultimate goal or achievement is to glorify God who created everything. Or worldview number two is there is no God. You believe in evolution. Everything happened by chance. There was no intelligent thought given to any of this. And so, therefore, there is no God that we have to serve or bow down to. So, man's ultimate achievement or ultimate goal or ultimate success would be to be better than his fellow man, to be in charge of his fellow man. And I would much rather live in the first worldview, which is what I do. So, to then say, well, if God would come down in human form, wouldn't that be a cult? With that worldview, God created everything. So it's impossible to be a cult. He created everything. He knows everything. And, and I, as a human, am thankful that I have life, that I live on a planet that has topsoil and water literally falls from the sky to feed plants so I can eat them. I mean, like you can go on and on and on, right? Like I can be born and have eyes that see, lungs that breathe. And from worldview number one, that all comes from God. Worldview number two, it's all an accident. And so then man can then say, well, I am going to go rule Jay and his family. Well, that's a cult. It wouldn't happen in worldview number one. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. But there are some things, I'm not well versed in the Bible at all, so excuse me, but
No worries.
There are some things that you're not able to do. Like they're considered sins, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a sense of control?
Yes. But again, the way I would look at it is, and I don't know if you're a parent, but like with a child, there are certain things.
I have one kid. He's 6.
Okay. So you get this. Okay. So again, in the Christian faith, it's God is our heavenly Father. You and I are fathers of little kids or of teenagers, in my case. And there are certain things that kid you can't do. Like, listen, buddy, like I love you, but you can't play with that knife or that flame.
Oh yeah.
Or the car.
Oh
right?
yeah.
Right. So okay. So people will maybe see these sins as, well, God doesn't let me do fill in the blank. Well, maybe look at it differently. Maybe he knows better than you. Maybe he knows what's good for you, right? And that's the way I try to look at it.
Interesting. Yeah, okay, that kind of resonates because when you say it like that, I don't think that my kid sees my family as a cult, right?
Right. Nor does he know what you know. Nor does he know what you know, right? He doesn't know how dangerous the flame is, the knife is, the dog, the Rottweiler, the car, etc.
He doesn't understand what I'm trying to give him a bath. I'm trying to help you. Like, come on, man. You literally have poo on you. I get in the bath. Get in the bath, man.
So that's why, again, for me as a Christian, there's an extreme amount of humility involved in it, that I don't have all the answers, which again goes to like the black and white of a cult leader who thinks they have all the answers.
I see what you're saying.
I know I don't have all the answers.
Yeah. Being a human being is so complex because then my mind goes to like Scientology, and like the creator of Scientology was literally a fiction author.
L. Ron Hubbard, yeah. And this book I'm reading talks about him, yeah.
Oh, it does. Awesome.
Yeah,
what are they saying about it?
Oh, he says he's absolutely a cult leader and apparently like a bad guy, which I don't know much about him.
Yeah. Have you ever dove into Scientology at all, like looking into it?
No, but again, I'm old enough to remember on TV they used to promote that book, Dianetics, over and over.
Yeah.
What is this book? I had no idea.
It's an interesting one because there's some of the biggest celebrities are involved in this.
Yeah.
And you can't deny how good they are at acting. And they look young.
That's a good one, Jack.
They're like 60 and look young.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's funny.
So let's talk about how did you how did you recover
Mm.
from being in a cult, and was it a hard road? Was it an easy road? What did that look like?
Oh, it was incredibly painful.
Yeah.
You trust me. If you have loved ones, friends, family that you think, and we can talk in this in a few minutes about that they might be headed into a cult. Going in and out of a cult is not fun. It's painful. So she left me. I was desperate to save the marriage, and at this point, I would have been brainwashed. I was again brainwashed for 2, 3 years, and I'm trying to like, no, really, I agree with him. I love Uncle Robert, and I thought he was going to save our marriage. So I didn't tell anybody she left. She took our 3 youngest kids. We have 5. She started
Wow.
telling them that no, your dad's a sperm donor and a bloodline, and the devil and a sorcerer. It was the
Oh
principal.
no.
Yeah, it was really bad.
Oh.
And I didn't talk to anybody for months. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I was a wreck. I was never
Yeah.
suicidal. I was hours away from checking into the hospital. Probably. I mean, I was a mess. And
Off
then I
off
found
top off the to the side real quick. Why weren't you suicidal?
my faith, because I know
Yeah.
that life is a gift, and I
Okay.
would never take away or extinguish the gift that the Lord gave me.
Okay.
So even though I
It's
was
a topic I talk about a lot on here
oh,
about
is it?
like
Okay.
suicide. Yeah. Yeah.
Never, nope, never. And again, I was getting 1 to 2 hours of sleep a night, and I don't know if you've ever had insomnia. It is
Yeah.
horrendous.
It's awful.
And so I was already emotionally drained and scared and terrified and in doubt, and then I couldn't sleep. I was lost 30 pounds, so I was 6'5", 170. I looked sickly, crying
Yeah.
with off I had, and nobody knew. And so she was basically like, don't tell anybody. We'll talk to the kids, we'll explain it to them, and then let's give the kids time to digest it before we tell anybody. That was Paige. And so
Wow.
then I would talk to Uncle Robert, and he was convincing me that I was not truly saved. I wasn't a Christian. I was unable to accept forgiveness, which is a total unbiblical lie. So I am just a wreck. I finally started to be like, you know what? There's something not right with this. I called and told my parents, my brothers, they're all around the country. They immediately supported me because I told them, please don't say anything negative about Paige and Uncle Robert, just support me. And as hard as it was, they did. And then I would pray all the time, like, Lord, please help me through this. And I think he finally opened my ears and eyes to the truth. And I was able, but Jay, it took about a year. It took a
Wow.
year, even though I was only brainwashed for about 3, to finally see that Uncle Robert was the problem. He was not the solution. Here I am thinking he's going to save my marriage, and he was the problem. He was the fox in the hen house. And
Yeah, a
then,
lot of people are in relationships, toxic relationships, and they'll never see that their partner is the issue. They will never see it. It's easy to see from the outside, but when you're involved in it, it's almost damn near impossible to see it.
well, that's that undue mind control at work. Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's exactly what I had going on. Like literally, she left me, and the day she left me, I was on the phone with Uncle Robert for like 3, 4 hours, like being consoled by him, even though I don't think ever told her to leave me, but he was clearly giving her the theological cover and ammunition to do it.
Yeah.
And then my family, of course, saw it right away, right? Because they knew about this weird Uncle Robert guy. They didn't know much about him. So they had no idea about churches as casinos and sitting to pee and Jewish conspiracy. They didn't know any of that because it was all
Whoa.
secret.
They didn't know any of that?
No, see, that brings up another point. That's how
Exactly.
cults,
Yeah. Let's take that avenue.
they control their members through secrecy, paranoia, and isolation. So we lived in Idaho and Montana during our marriage, and my family, again, when I say that, my parents, my brothers and their wives, and
Yeah.
nieces and nephews, they lived on the coast, East Coast, West Coast. So we just kept it all secret, which of course was, well, Uncle Robert knew about the Jewish threat, so his life is in danger. So don't say certain words on the cell phone, shred your trash, and don't share the truth with, Peter, your family, because don't throw your pearls before the swine. Because it wasn't that Uncle Robert was crazy. It was nobody would understand his brilliance. That's the way it was.
There's always that
explained.
justification.
Yep.
Wow.
So I was totally isolated. So then when Paige left, nobody knew what was going on. I was completely on my own, and
You're in an echo chamber.
Suffered. Ugh, it was so horrible.
Wow. Yeah, so, like, what conversations would you have with your parents? It's just a normal conversation, but your entire life is pretty much you can't talk about because that's what you were living. That was your life, but you couldn't bring that up to your parents or family.
Yeah, so like we would still see my parents and my other, brothers and their families at Christmas or maybe, a family gathering once during the summer. So we would see each other once or twice a year, and we were polite and cordial and we would talk. But, again, we didn't talk about Jewish conspiracies. We didn't talk about casinos. There was always, at least for me, an undercurrent of, I got to hide this. And
Yeah. Well,
I think
when they're like, "Hey, Paul, can you pass the chicken? Paul, how's it going? What are you doing?
yeah,
What's life like?"
right, right.
What are you saying?
Well, I remember when Paige left me, my life was a wreck. People would say, "How you doing?" And I just had to lie all the time. Like I wanted to
Yeah.
say, "I'm horrible. Help." And I'd be like, "No, I'm fine."
Oh
And
God.
it was hard. It was
Yeah,
it
that's
was
brutal.
miserable. Yeah. And again, that's how cults control people. So what I tell people is like, well, what can you do for someone? Okay, the first red flag is if someone has now kind of cut off all historical contact and communication and fellowship. So whether it's Bible study or bowling league, book club, right? They
Mhm.
stop coming, they stop calling, they stop emailing, they stop writing. And now they have all kinds of praise and adulation for a new person in their life. Doesn't mean they're in a cult, but those are bad signs. And,
Wow.
and and you have to reach out because again, the person who is now going down the road of mind control, remember, they don't know it. They think they're
Yeah.
headed towards something beautiful. You have to step in and say and have that tough conversation. Hey, buddy, what's going on? Like you never show up anymore, and now who's this guy? Tell me more about this guy. Right? Get them
Yeah.
talking.
Was there an end goal? Like when you what was said when you die within this cult? Was there something other than going to heaven?
Not that I know of, but good question. There
Okay.
was no one in the cult that was under his mind control that had died when I was involved. Again, it would have been, no, you're going to heaven. But boy, thank God Robert got you there.
Okay.
That's the way to put it. I mean,
Okay, yeah. Right. Is this cult disassembled or is it still going on to your knowledge?
as far as I know, it's still going on. A lot of people ask me, well, what happens when Uncle Robert dies? I don't know. Unfortunately, Paige has been
He'll
in
never
it.
die. Don't you know?
They say, oh, he'll never die, right? Yeah.
He'll never die.
And unfortunately for Paige, she's been in it her whole life, and she did a lot of bad things, but she's a victim just like I am. She just doesn't know it yet.
Let's say that Uncle Robert finally dies. What do you think happens to Paige? Do you think she snaps out of it, or
I don't know.
what
I honestly don't
happens?
know. I don't. Well, first of all, if she were to snap out of it, I think that'd be an unbelievably painful realization. I can't imagine what that would look like because it was painful for me, and I
Yeah.
was brainwashed for 3 years. She's been brainwashed her whole life. So, yeah, it'll be hard. I would hope, though, for her that she would snap out of it, but I just don't know. I don't know, and I don't know
You
what it
said
would
you're
look like.
single right now. Are you seeing anybody?
No, I still have 2 kids at home, and as a single
Mhm.
dad, it's a ton of work. Um, it's not that I wouldn't ever, and I hope one day I don't want to, be alone the rest of my life. But right now, there are seasons in life, and I'm just so busy.
Yeah. Well, busy's good. Busy's good.
Yeah, busy's good.
Um,
Yeah.
I asked that because I'm just curious. I didn't want to offend your girlfriend, but let's hypothetically, if Paige gets out of this call, Uncle Robert dies, and then Paige calls you and just has like this opening, and she apologizes and she tells you she was brainwashed, and obviously you would be like, I understand, I know.
Right.
What would that look like? Would you ever consider getting back together if that were to happen?
Yeah. Boy, you went straight for the heart here, didn't you, Jay? Holy
Yeah, I had
smokes.
to. Yeah, it's curious.
Yeah. So here's the way I'll describe it. I did not want the divorce. It took like 3 years to finally go through the courts, mainly because of the kids. It got very complicated, and it was quite horrible what was happening to them because of the parental
Yeah,
alienation. And I didn't want it. And I hate divorce. I hate the idea that I am divorced, a single dad, and all that. And I have an ex-wife.
I'm divorced as well. That's why I also brought this up.
So I would for years. Now, again, you may have heard of the phrase, having a road to Damascus type moment. It's from the Bible. So whereas a guy in the Bible, Saul becomes Paul. He completely gets turned around by God. Okay. So on the road to Damascus, the Lord appears to him and changes his life. And I used to pray that Paige would have that. She would have that moment where the Lord would open her eyes. And it hasn't happened yet, as far as I know. And it would be a miracle if it does happen, right? I do believe in miracles. But now there's been so much water under the bridge. It honestly would probably take 2 miracles. So, for Paige to have her eyes open and for me to love her again, because I just don't.
Yeah.
But who knows? If the Lord can do that for her, he could do it for me too.
You're right. Thank you for being open with that. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. It's just a question that because I know when you go through a divorce that you have a lot of time to think and you kind of play out your life almost and like what scenarios could happen if they were to happen. Right. It's an interesting thing what your mind does when you go through some hardships.
Oh, the mind never turns off, right?
Sure doesn't.
I'll tell you another book I love, which, again, Eckhart Tolle, he's a very good writer. And there's some of his stuff that's way out there that I do not agree with. But it was Robert Booty who said, you should read this book, The Power of Now. I don't know if you've ever read it, but the first 100 pages I thought were incredible. And he does a better job than anybody. The Secret, Who Moved My Cheese, all these other books of describing how fear is having your mind think about possibilities in the future. And pain or regret is where your mind's focusing on the past. It's as simple as that. But he does a really good job of explaining it. It's amazing when you think about it.
You only know what you know. And I know it sounds so simple, but it's so true. And there's so many resources out there that you can, I used to not read a lot. And then I started opening books. I'm like, there is just so much information, and that's why I started this podcast as well, because people have different experiences than me. I only have such a limited amount of experience. I can only experience so much. And whether you like it or not, there's people out there who are experiencing more than you, so go talk to them. It's like reading a new book every time I talk to somebody. And now I get that knowledge. I get to kind of let that inside of my life, let it resonate. And now I can reshare those stories. Or if I'm going through a hard time, some turbulent times, I can think back onto a story that I had a conversation with, and it's like therapeutic almost in a sense.
I was blessed to have a very good college professor. I went to George Washington University in DC, and he was a history professor. I loved history. And he said, I'll never forget it. He said, the more you read, the more you will realize how much you don't know. I thought,
yes, wonderfully said. It's so true. Bingo. So you find yourself reading a lot, huh?
Oh, I love to read. My goal is a book a week. I'm really more like one every 2 weeks. And I'm just not a fast reader, but I love to read. I do 2 little 2-minute book reviews on my YouTube channel just for fun. Like I'm not trying to monetize it, but I read a book and I give a little 2-minute review. Like, hey, here's what I think about this book.
That's awesome. Yeah. There's so much to learn out there. Jeez, that's cool, man. You must be a fast reader, my Lord.
It's like the funny thing is I've taken like little speed reading courses before. And I'm still slow. I still sub-vocalize, like in my mind, I'm kind of reading it out loud. You're not supposed to do that. And then I finally watched one video on speed reading where the guy's like, listen, if you're going like 1,000 words a minute, you're not reading, you're skimming. I thought, thank you. Okay. Now I feel okay that I read at this pace. Like I'm fine. I don't need to read any faster because I want to enjoy it.
Yeah. I have to read the same page like 30 times because each time I read it, I'll have a different scenario playing out in my head. I'm like, I don't even know what's real anymore. Like, my mind is so scattered that I'll read something 3 times and have 3 different stories play on my mind.
Or it's amazing how distracted we can get, right?
That's for certain.
Oh, you're reading something and it's like you're thinking about, the next cup of coffee or whatever it is. And like,
oh, yeah. So I want to know what you did for work when you were within this cult.
So here's the fascinating thing is, again, people think of cult members as like, they shave their heads, they wear a fancy robe, they live in a commune,
in the same neighborhood or in the same commune.
No. I was a sports broadcaster. I traveled around the country, around the world. I was
so crazy.
I worked for OLN, the Outdoor Life Network, and then other smaller networks. I did games for ESPN3. And I traveled the country. I was doing football and college basketball and cycling and rodeo and lumberjack, you name it. And didn't dare tell anybody about Uncle Robert.
Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy.
Boy, do I got a story for you.
Yeah, right.
No one's going to believe this.
Oh, gee. Well,
What was your
that's the interesting thing. Sorry, Jay. And that's the interesting thing is that when I wrote this memoir, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger, put it out there on Amazon. And I, tried to, during the launch, let everybody know about the book. And so there was people that I worked with, other people on air, directors, producers, I worked with in TV who had no idea what I went through.
Yeah.
So for them to read it, they were just, again, their jaw hit the floor. They had no idea.
What kind of things were they saying to you? Like they would reach out or no?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think everybody who reads the book would be like, I am so sorry I didn't know, because what I went through was
wow.
Now, again, I'm much stronger now. As a person, I wish I could have learned this differently. But again, Lord knows better than I do. And I learned I'm stronger. But most of it was, hey, I had no idea. And then B, I'm glad you're better. Yeah, I'm glad you're doing well.
That's nice. That's nice. Wow. That's crazy. Did you ever imagine that you were going to write a book?
Well, so this is my second book. So the answer to the question is yes. My first book is a novel about faith in basketball. It's called The Blue Team. And that got released in 2016. And I remember before I released it, Paige was like, oh, you should really have Uncle Robert and my dad read it. So I did. And of course, they ripped it to shreds and almost ruined it.
Naturally, of course.
So, and then when I published it, Uncle Robert then said the only reason I wrote it was to try and fool he and my wife and my in-laws that I was a Christian, because I really wasn't. Oh my goodness gracious. So I always, for years, I knew I wanted to write that book. I did not think I would write multiple books, but so now I have two and I'm working on a third, and I love it. I love telling stories.
Do you like reading or writing better?
Oh boy, that's kind of like, do I like breathing in or breathing out?
Which one is it? Just kidding.
I just love them both. Okay, I'll give you the two best pieces of writing advice I was ever given. It's number one, if you want to be a great writer, you got to be a great reader. And then number two, you write about what you know. So I'm going to, I guess, probably take the easy way out, Jay, and punt and say I like them both.
Do you ever plan on having a podcast, or do you have a podcast?
I don't have a podcast. I don't plan on having one. I've been on over 30 podcasts now through the promotion of my book, and also my story is like a cautionary tale, for people to avoid getting into cults and getting sucked into cults. And I'm so busy that I feel like for me, my avenue to share my stories is my writing. And then I go speak publicly, and I really enjoy that.
Oh, that's cool.
About my book. And again, the ideas of, hey, here's how you spot a cult and here's what you can do to avoid it.
Do you have anything to say to somebody that might be listening who might be in a cult, but they don't know they're in a cult? Like what kind of message would you have to them? Let's assume that someone's in a cult that's listening, but they have no idea they're in a cult.
So no matter what I say, they will still think after I'm done that they're not in a cult. Okay.
That's so crazy.
It is. So then the better thing for me to say at this moment would be, let's say there are two people listening, and one's in Des Moines and one's in Duluth. Okay. And the one in Des Moines is in a cult. They don't know it. His best friend is in Duluth. Okay. To the buddy in Duluth, you need to be bold and courageous and step up and have that difficult conversation with your friend, because your friend doesn't see it. I'm not saying that they're definitely in a cult, but if you have doubts and questions and are concerned, don't sit on it. Be bold, reach out. Here's another great quote, Jay. And I remember hearing this and I thought, oh my gosh, this defines, maybe not defines, but is a great encapsulation of my errors. And it is, difficult choices, easy life. Easy choices, difficult life. In other words, the difficult, hard conversations that you and I know we're supposed to have, if we don't have them, we're going to have a hard life. But if you engage in that really hard, awkward, difficult conversation that you know you're supposed to have, and you have it right away, life will be easier. So have those difficult conversations, everybody.
Where's that quote from?
It's from an old Stoic. So it's Matt Ferris. I think it's Matt Ferris, the author. He's written a number of books on like productivity hacks. No, Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss. You can look him up. He's probably has his own podcast. Very successful guy. He got the quote from another guy who was like a Stoic, and he did a TEDx talk on it. And let's just look up Tim Ferriss TEDx, and you'll find it.
Have you heard this quote before? It goes something like, hard times create strong men create good times create
weak men. Yep.
Weak men, and weak men create hard times. That's kind of what I was thinking when you said that.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. It's spot on, I think. And when I hear something like that, should we try to alleviate that, or should we try, is it just meant to be, because like without rain, what sunshine,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, again, I would also say this too, Uncle Robert Booty, there was hardly ever any small talk. Like he would go right for the jugular. He would find out your weakest link, your weakest point, and would go right for it to manipulate and control you. I am not saying that. I am saying speak out in love. And I am saying having these difficult conversations doesn't so much create easy times. It creates strong people. It creates strong bonds. It prevents people from ignoring what is ruining them, destroying their lives. So to me, that does not. So to me, that is not a correlation of have these difficult conversations and easy life makes you soft. Easy life, as in you are strong, so that the difficulties of life don't seem that hard. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, completely.
Okay. Good.
What do you wish someone would have done for you if they could have done anything when you were in this cult that you didn't know you were in? Do you wish someone would have had a conversation with you, or were you just so far gone that you wouldn't have listened and you wouldn't have believed that it took a divorce for you to actually realize?
Yeah. And I realized before the divorce, but I know what you're saying. Like she left me.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like what you were saying, with all this time to think, your mind goes back and you play the what if game, right? So for me, the what if game, I can tell you this beyond a shadow of a doubt, that as long as Robert Booty had this position of authority in Paige's life, our marriage was doomed. Okay. So I can say that with certainty. So then I think, okay, well then at what point could I have gone back in time and tried to help Paige see? And you would have had to go all the way back to when I first read that crazy letter about the dream. And it's so fascinating and so amazing. And when you read my book, again, you would be like, I cannot believe that happened. It's the most fascinating thing. You would have had to go all the way back to 1996. And
when did you join the cult? When did you become?
When I first fell in love with her. And I first fell in love with her and then realized what Robert Booty stood for, what Uncle Robert stood for. And I didn't see it at that moment. See, that's what's so amazing is I didn't realize it till many years later. I had my doubts. I knew it was kind of weird. But looking back with hindsight, I see I had that moment in 1996 with that letter. So did she. And I blew it.
96. So when did you first meet Uncle Robert? What year was it?
So here's it's amazing. Paige and I met on a Sunday in late October. She had the dream probably in September, October. Uncle Robert wrote the letter on a Wednesday, mailed it on a Friday. Okay, Paige and I met that Sunday. Within like 2 weeks, I know I wanted to marry her. Wow. I read the letter like a month later. She shows it to me. I'm thinking, this is really weird. I meet Uncle Robert a few months later at her brother's wedding. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go. We get engaged 2 weeks later, and we are married 9 months to the day of when we met.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Life happens fast.
Oh my goodness. And she wrote a letter after, quote unquote, he saved her. I mean, all this happened like in this 12-month period. It's so fascinating. She wrote a letter to him kind of expressing doubt about me. And she never sent it to Uncle Robert. And she saved it and never sent it. And then after she left me 20 years later, she moved back in with her parents. She's going through some old things. And in this old box in the basement, she finds this letter that she never sent. And if I had only sent this letter to Uncle Robert, I could have been spared all this. So then she
Yeah.
told all the kids, well, if I hadn't married your dad, you'd still be here. You would just look differently.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that, do you think Paige, this is a hard question and you don't have to answer if you don't want. So, but do you think Paige saw you as a good candidate for the cult? And I know she doesn't think it's a cult, but do you think she saw you as a good candidate, or do you think she actually loved you? Again, you don't have to answer that. It's just, it popped in my head. I just wanted to.
Well, there's two questions there. So the one question I can answer easier, do I think Paige loved me? And again, I've gone around and around in my mind on that. I do think for a certain amount of time, yes, she did love me. There's no question. At what point did she stop? It's kind of the question, right? And I don't know. But clearly she did. Then the other one would be not so much a candidate for the cult, because remember, she doesn't think there was a cult, but was I a candidate for, let's say, a husband that Uncle Robert would approve of? And
that's how we have to look at it. Yes.
Yeah. Right. And so that's part of what that letter was that she never sent. So then when she finally, literally 20 years to the day, when she found it in January or February of 2017, she sends it to Uncle Robert. And, look at this. And then he said, if I had gotten that letter, I would have never let you marry Peter. I mean, just the arrogance and pomposity of it, right? Ugh.
So I wonder what your life would look like.
Well, and I'm glad she never sent the letter, because we wouldn't have these 5 children. And,
I know.
So to me, the Lord was protecting my children by not having Paige send that letter. Yeah,
it's a blessing, man, having kids. I mean, that's everyone's prerogative. It's everyone's choice if you want kids or not. But I mean, there's just like another part to life, and that's having offspring, I would say, since I have a kid.
Being a father is one of the most amazing things I could think of. It's
same here. So gratifying. Yeah. You learn yourself, you learn from your kid. It's amazing. They're so young, they're so pure, and you can just take in so much from them. It's not so much that we're doing all the teaching, we are, but how much you can actually learn and how to be a better person yourself from watching something so natural and so full of life and so full of joy and energy and just pure bliss when I look at my kid.
Yeah. And you also realize too that someone's always watching everything you do and say. That little bugger's watching.
That's right. Peter Young, man, I appreciate you being here and taking the time. This was awesome. Thank you so much for being so open with me. I know I asked a lot of tough questions and you were on the ball. Really appreciate it, man. How can people find your book? How can they buy it? Go ahead and take some time to shill out your website, your books, where they can get everything, your social media, if you have it.
Sure. So I do have my own website. It's authorpeteryoung.com. You can go there. You can get a link to my YouTube site, my YouTube channel, my Amazon page. So both of my books are on Amazon. So it's The Blue Team and then Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. So I would love it if you bought the book, leave a review. I do truly think you will learn a lot from reading my book. So that'd be great.
Awesome. Peter Young, thank you very much. And everyone at home, I'm going to be going to a wedding this week. So the next time that we'll get on this podcast is going to be this weekend. So hope you enjoy this episode. This is wonderful. Peter Young and Uncle Robert, if you're listening out there, do better. Do better.
Pick up the book.
Yeah, go buy the book. All right, everyone. Take care. Thanks again, Peter.
Thanks, Jay.